Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now on the other side, the Gospel according to Luke, the 23rd chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. It was now about noon, and the darkness had come over the whole land until 3 p.m. While the sun's light failed and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, Certainly this man was innocent. And when all the crowds who gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Reactions. In this Midweek Lenten series, we've focused on reactions, on people who have been meeting Jesus along the way on the cross and their reactions to what was happening. We saw different people, all with immediate reactions. Like in our first one, several weeks ago now, like the disciple who, at the arrest scene, tries to defend Jesus and through anger pulls out a sword and cuts off the ear of a slave of the high priest. Or we saw the abject grief of the daughters of Jerusalem, seeing Jesus headed off to be crucified. Or last week we saw the criminals that were crucified next to Jesus crying out in desperation and frustration, trying to figure out who they were and who this Jesus was. All reaction to what's going on. Today, we see the reaction people have when Jesus finally dies on the cross. And it's all reaction. It's all knee-jerk, probably not thought out, not really deliberate, because reaction is different than response. Responses are how we choose to reply to a situation. Reaction isn't a choice. It's simply how our bodies and our minds, and then, yes, indeed, our words and our actions, behave in a situation. And frankly, we often wish we could react differently than we did. And it's hard because after that initial reaction, we don't like how we've reacted and sometimes wish we could do it differently. But it's happened. But I think there's something more. Our reactions are deeply personal. And more than anything, probably surprising. We could be surprised how we react to a situation, sometimes embarrassed even. I was thinking about this last week, and I had a good friend, and I was in a grad program who was writing a book on megachurches. This was in Seattle, and went to a variety of different churches in Seattle as a sociologist, just analyzing and looking at what was happening there and taking notes. Very secular person, wasn't very interested in much of what was being said. And the book did happen. It was co-written, and it was kind of scandalously called High on God, about megachurches. I'll let you on that. But anyway, it really was about the incredible emotional reaction in a megachurch space. That was what the book was kind of doing. And they said it's kind of like a drug. And you probably could guess that my friend who was writing this book was not a big fan of megachurches. It's not an overly respectful tone to take. But she shared with me that doing the research was interesting because her attitude changed along the way. And it was not because by going to these churches she became convinced of the theology. If anything, she became even more bothered by attending, hearing the sermons, and doing this. But what struck her was that she was observing the emotional response of all of these people around her. And then what surprised her was about her own reaction, that she was feeling those emotions too. That even though she didn't like what they were saying, she was feeling the feelings that they were talking about. It was a surprise. It was a reaction that she never would have predicted. And she changed her whole tone in her book. The title was already the title, and the publisher was very interested in it. But that this was a deeply meaningful thing to those who were attending. And that she just had much more compassion about it. She still didn't like it. She didn't come around, but she appreciated it because of that immediate reaction. There was something within her that responded to this, and it gave her empathy for those who also responded to it, which could not be translated when she was studying this stuff in books. Those are reactions. We have them. The people at the cross had them too. But I think maybe we've done a little bit of a disservice to those at the cross. And I don't know if this is a specific Lutheran thing or just generally as Protestant Christians, in that we've been focusing on those immediate reactions. We often can imagine that. What is your immediate reaction? Those reactions like anger or grief or frustration. And we can see them as almost bad things, or at the very least temporary things. And the goal is, let's get beyond that initial reaction and get to what's real behind it. Sometimes we could talk like that. I think that's not very helpful when we're talking about Jesus on the cross. Maybe not helpful at all. But that we need our reactions. Those immediate responses that are not cognitive, but just held deeply within us. We need those things when we come to the foot of the cross. We need to sit in a space where we simply experience. Because that's what causes a reaction, is genuine experience. And I think we do, as Lutherans, a really good job each week of talking about the cross. We preach Christ and Christ crucified. But do we take the time to experience the way to the cross? Or are we so quickly jumping into our theologies of atonement and law and gospel and different things happening, that do we simply let Jesus' death affect us in a deep way? And then if we do, are we comfortable with reaction? Like anger and frustration and sometimes not knowing what to do with it. And I raise that because I think that's what happens with these observers here who see Jesus die. We have this centurion. We know nothing about this person before or after. There's some church tradition that tries to give him a name and so on, but it doesn't say. And he makes a declaration from seeing Jesus die. Surely this man is innocent. We don't know his motivations. We don't know his prior knowledge of Jesus. All we know is he's at the foot of the cross and compelled to cry this out. Truly this man is innocent. And actually that word for innocent can equally be translated righteous. It means both things at once. He's speaking something very true about Jesus as a reaction to the experience. And some have indeed wondered if he's even being genuine here, or is this being like sarcastic, as if you just saw this person die and it's like, oh, well, look at this righteous person. But the Gospel of Luke doesn't really interpret it that way. It starts by saying he glorified God and made this statement. I don't think he plans on making that statement. He who's seen Jesus die, instead I think that's his reaction. that probably surprised him. And then look at these spectators. This one's even more striking. These people who are seen as distinct from the acquaintances of Jesus. We don't know who they are, but it's made clear they're not people who knew Jesus before that. And the Greek is even more the case where it says, those who were seeing the spectacle, which is not really a compliment to them. They go home beating their breasts from seeing this event. I think that would be a surprising reaction if you were there to see the spectacle. I came here to see something grand, and instead, it affected my life. I have to think about this now. And this is the real point of it, and my whole point tonight of why do we value these reactions? I don't think it's just because we need to process through them so we get to some real feelings, but because reaction is how we experience, how it opens experience to us, and then a way it affects our own bodies, our own selves. There's a book I like called The Body Keeps the Score, called that if you do not process the deep emotions and wounds you have, your body will, in sometimes very negative, painful ways, and then come out in every way that's not the point. But even more so, reactions provide what we might call a liminal space, a space between where I can say I know what's going on and I'm not sure that I believe this. It's especially true in belief in God to say, I'm not ready to say I believe this, but I'm also not ready to say I don't believe this. It's something in between. These spectators who came to see the spectacle, who go home beating their breasts, something has affected them, and I don't think they're ready yet to say what that is. They're simply reacting. And then they will be invited for reflection later that will then turn those reactions one way or another. Some, like my friend in this project, didn't go home and saying, well, I've had this reaction and felt those feelings, so therefore no, the megachurches were really right all along. That was absolutely not her review. But she had the reaction. There's something here we need to take seriously. Or it can lead you the other way. This reflection makes me say, maybe there's something here more than I realized before. Maybe I believe this more than I thought I did. I will say, growing up in both Mount Angel, which was very highly Roman Catholic, and then later on in my childhood we moved to Idaho, which was very largely Latter-day Saints, we never wanted to go to church with any of our friends who did these other things because what if I believed something? What if my reaction was not as negative as I was sure it had to be? Our reactions provide us space for reflection. They give us a space to be honest about who I am and what I believe, and then to say, what are you doing among me today, God? How are you bringing out what's real and alive within me that's been there this whole time, I've just not been naming? And here at the foot of the cross, I think that's exactly what happens. So I'd like to invite us, as we come to the foot of the cross in this Lenten series, as we look forward to Holy Week, as we come to the empty tomb in Easter, what's our reaction? Can we allow ourselves the experience of that space to say, how do I hear this? How does it lead and bring something alive in me and hold on to that as valuable in and of itself as a true expression of God among us? Amen. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome.